Welcome again, everyone. I can see a lot of you have stayed with us, and we've had a few more join as well, so that's brilliant to see. My name is Melanie Cargill, and I'm the manager of Menter Moch Cymru. This is the second session in our virtual conference taken during today. So this session is focused on market insight and looking at what the current and future consumer trends are. The area is really important for businesses to be aware of so we can ensure we capitalise on the possible opportunities. And we're delighted to have Sophie from Category Insight join us today to deliver this webinar. Sophie, in a previous role, was the Group Marketing Director of Tulip Foods. She's currently also part of the Brookdale consulting team that manages the Welsh Government Food and Drink Insight Programme. As those that attended Mix webinar will be aware, there are potential opportunities, especially with the local markets, that we could make the most of. So hopefully Sophie will give us some insight and some ideas on how to do that. And similar to Mix session, again, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions throughout, and I know you were in this Mix session, you were really great at submitting your questions, so hopefully you'll do the same again. But there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so please ask questions throughout, and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can at the end. And you're welcome to ask your questions in English and Welsh. Also, we're really happy to have at the end of the webinar, we're hoping to have Kirsty Jones from Hubby Cymru just to join us to give a quick overview of the work that they're doing with pork blasus. And so before then, we'll crack on with Sophie's session. So I'm going to pass you over to Sophie now.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Let me try and share the screen and see if it comes up all right. So I'm hoping you're just seeing my main slide, not my slide and notes.
That's it. We can just see your slides.
Well, that's good news, isn't it? Otherwise, it's always a bit of a disaster. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction, Mel. As Mel said, I'm Sophie Colquhoun. I run my own business, Category Insight, and I also work with Brookdale Consulting, and we purchase the Insight and help run the Insight programme for Welsh Food and Drink. So most of the insight that I'm presenting today, well, in fact, all of it has come from that Insight programme. I'm going to talk about three things really today. I'm going to talk about, sorry, there we go. I'm going to talk about the current market in terms of market update, some slightly pre-COVID data, but I think that will be useful, and what we think the implications are as we come out of sort of COVID pandemic, hopefully this year. I'm going to talk about some food trends, and I've got quite a big section on that. Some quite hopefully specific stuff around pork that I think you'll find quite interesting. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the value of Welshness and a big piece of research that we did this year about what does Welshness mean and how can we use that to market our products. So let's start off with the market update. And let's talk about the size of the food and drink market in Wales. It's worth about £9.3 billion. This was pre-COVID. So if you look at the chart, you can see three areas on there. The first is what we call in-home grocery. So what's bought in the supermarket and taken back into the home, or in independent retailers and taken back into the home and then eaten. And that's worth about 5.6 billion, or 60% of the marketplace. About 30% was eating out of home. So whether you ate it as sort of food to go, or whether you ate in a restaurant, that was about 30% of the market. And then another 10% was alcohol, so what you would drink in pubs, etc., outside of the home. Now, what we do know, of course, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, is this year that whole out of home section has really collapsed. I've got some numbers on that later, but roughly it's usually worth, as this says, about 40% of the market's roughly halved this year in a GB context. So let's talk about in-home first. So if we think about retail, this is retail share of trade within Wales. And roughly in Wales, or this year in Wales, and this is data up to the end of December actually, this year in Wales, retail sales actually grew 14%, which is massive. And if you think about If you think in previous years, 1 or 2% would be the normal number. This shows how much obviously sales have gone from people being able to eat out at home and then eating in home separately. And all the big retailers have done very well. So Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's and Morrison's. And they've done well through selling through their shops, and they've also done well through selling online. And I'm going to talk about the effect of online in a minute. The other big area that I think is interesting here is, for the first time ever, we can see, the discounters not performing as well. And that might be partly to the, environment. People don't feel quite as safe as shopping in a discounter maybe, or actually the way they've shopped actually changed. So they're buying more when they go to a shop and going less often. So bigger shops. So therefore, if you're not selling a complete piece, you're either going to a big shop or your very local shop. And that's why we've seen the independent sector as well. If you look at the right-hand side of the chart, it's nearly in 40% growth. The other thing to note about this is Wales has grown slightly quicker than GB in-home, and that's probably because we've been slightly more aggressive in our lockdowns than GB, and therefore people have eaten out just slightly less. But as I said, what's happened with food service or out of home, and really, what we can see is the combination here of food and drink sales in the total market. So the blue bars on the top are take home every month sales, and the orange bits on the bottom of what's been eaten outside of the home. And if you look at sort of February 2020 here, it's about 4.1 billion was eaten out of the home in February, somewhere around that sort of number. And then we hit lockdown in April, and it drops to, a very low number, 1.2 billion. And the net effect on the combination was down about 22%. And that excludes alcohol. So if you added alcohol into that, it's probably nearer 26, 27%, we think. However, we see it slowly grow through the summer as we had the Eat Out to Help Out campaign. But of course, now we're in another lockdown, and I suspect we'll see numbers of about -10 or -12. The IGD issued some numbers yesterday, and they said that they think the net effect was -12 for the whole year for the total food and drink industry. So obviously, although retail's done well, the net effect means there's been significantly less sales value going through the system. It doesn't mean that people necessarily ate less food, because of course the margins in out of home are significantly bigger. But what about pork? And what about pork before the pandemic? So we bought some data in February last year, and I think you've just probably had quite a bit on market review, so I'm going to do a little bit on this. But before February, I suppose pre-COVID, what was happening in retail? And the whole market was up about 0.5%. That includes fresh meat, fish and poultry, and meat-free. But pork wasn't doing so well, so it was down about 3%. And the reasons behind that was actually due to some significant switching. And what was happening was shoppers were moving from buying red meat, particularly pork in this case, red meat, and moving across to more white meat. So moving towards poultry and moving towards fish. And you can see that, pork had lost about £4.8 million worth of sales to poultry. But remember, this is a gigantic market, so it's not overall, it's not mega, but is significant switching. And it wasn't really meat-free that was driving that, although it did gain some significant sales. So what about now? What is the effect of COVID been on our market? Well, total fresh meat sales this year, and again, this is to the end of December, are up 17.5% in GB, which is, pretty significant. And if we look at all the rows in green, we can see all the pork categories. And fresh pork was up about 15%, so slightly behind, but still up significantly. But if you look at all the pork products, they're worth almost 3 billion across all those sectors. And some sectors have done phenomenally well, and not a surprise really. I suppose that bacon and sausages have done really well. And two reasons, I suppose. Sausages have done well because it's a really easy assembly meal, and within when people are working from home more often, but also breakfast has obviously grown. Breakfast is an occasion we were eating out of the home much more, we're now eating in home, and that's grown those sectors up over 20% for both, and shows the growth in those two sectors. The other area I wanted to talk about when we're talking about the market is this whole thing about online. So we know, we've read a lot of press about how much sales have gone online, and they really have. in total grocery, it went from something like 7.5% to 13.5% of all sales have gone online, and actually still running at capacity through the major multiples, where slots are difficult to get and people are still buying more and more. And from a meat, fish and poultry point of view, it went from somewhere like 2.2% in December 2007, right the way through suddenly in May this year up to 7.5% of all sales went through online. And that was only May, and I suspect that's accelerated more, and we'll get some more data soon to give us the latest piece on that. But it just shows how much online is now worth in part in terms of meat, fish and poultry. The other thing that I thought was worth showing you was, the fastest growing categories that were for the 4 weeks ending of November. And one of the things in here, unsurprising, liquid soaps up, men's skincare, antiseptics, all that sort of stuff you'd expect to be really high. And then coming in flour with all that home baking going on. But what was I quite interested for me was the next category from a food perspective is fresh and flavoured meats, showing nearly over 40% growth, with people looking for added flavour in their meals in the evening, something simple to make that meal assembly meal. So whether it's chips, meat and veg, what we call a meal assembly type meal, something with a flavour already put on it is obviously growing significantly. And this was in November, so we're not talking about summer barbecues here. So we talked a bit about what's happened in the pandemic, and I suppose what we need to talk about is, what's going to happen going forward from a consumer point of view. And what we do know is it may not be now, and it may not be in a few months' time, but we do know there is a significant recession to come. And this is quite a complicated chart, but hopefully I'll explain it. So in 2008, this showed what the shopper movements happened in 2008, and there was a recession in 2008. And of course, the prediction is this is going to be significantly more severe, unfortunately. And 4 things really happened. The first thing that happened was people ate in home more than they ate out of home. Now, whether that will happen as we come out initially, I suspect won't be the case. But if recession really bites, people will not be able to afford to eat out so much. And we're not talking about massive movements here. We're talking 1 or 2%, but still significant if you think about the total value. The second thing they did is they then went to cheaper stores. They went to shop at cheaper stores, and that was the massive rise in sort of Aldi and Lidl and those sort of retailers. And what was quite interesting now is if you look at what Tesco are doing, they are 100% focusing on the fact that you can buy large ranges of own label, but also large ranges of retail products at Aldi prices, because they've gained loads of shoppers in the last 12 months through the pandemic. And what they're desperate to do is not lose those shoppers to Aldi and Lidl when the recession bites. The second thing that happened was then people actually chose cheaper products. So we saw people trade down. So they go maybe from finest to standard tier, or go from more premium brands to slightly cheaper brands. We saw a raft of tertiary brands being launched at that time. And then as a result of all that, and also the increase of potentially own label penetration, so people buying more own label from brand. And as a result of that, we also saw brands promote more. And as a result, we saw, sales, again, overall devaluation because there was more being sold on promotion. So I think there are quite a lot of things that may happen again. I think the one thing that we've got to understand at this time is that from a meat, fish and poultry point of view, I've seen some numbers that says, actually the retail prices in 2008 were probably higher than they are now. So therefore the room for manoeuvre on promotions is going to be less. So I suppose that sums up sort of a market view, and I'm sure you'll have some questions for me at the end about that. But what I want to talk about now is future trends. So I'm going to talk about 10 specific trends this morning, which I think are related to us. We have done a broader piece of work called Shopper of the Future with Welsh Government, which is a more like 3 to 5 year societal changes. And that is going to be shared through the Farming Connect conference, which I think goes live on the 1st of February. But today I'm going to talk about 10 specific trends, which I think are more relevant for us. And I've ranked them from number 10 up to number 1, and number 10 being, in my view, the least important, but the least most important, if you like, from our perspective over the next 18 months. And the first of those is love your veg and stealth health. Well, we know we're coming to the end of veganuary, and we saw in one of the previous slides that meat-free is worth about £588 million, and this year has grown about 26%. So it is becoming more mainstream, But obviously, if it's a £588 million market versus the £3 billion pork products market, it's still significant. It's still a lot smaller. But we are knowing that people are eating more flexitarian diets, moving to more plant-based is becoming more mainstream. And we are seeing other things like not just veganery, but regenery, and talking about regenerative agriculture. And I'm going to talk about that later. But one of the ways that we can think about this trend and whether or not we can do something about some of the products we sell is whether or not, we can become veg first with meat later in some way. So, can we do things like mushrooms and meat burger? So we get hidden veg, and that is quite interesting in terms of improving health credentials in this area. As I said, it's number 10. So number 9 then is Fired Up. And Fired Up is linked to this whole alfresco cooking, and I'm going to talk about that later. But it's all about this idea of fire cooking and the whole growth in smoking and those smoke type products. So not just any smoked, but specific smokes, whether that's oat smoke, chestnut smoke, hickory smoked, or even layering of fire flavors such as charred meat or with blistered tomatoes, or different types of techniques such as Japanese or Korean or Thai. And then the whole area around slow and low smoking. So, the whole stuff around this added flavor area has had a lot with the whole sous vide culture, which is sort of pre-cooked meats in flavor that's sold that you just warm up at home, and how you can use those slow and more value cuts on things like barbecues, I think is quite interesting. And I suppose what this really does sort of emphasize opportunities for tradition and techniques in food production, and being able to sell that when we sell some of our products wherever we sell them. Coming in at number 8 then is biodiversity and biotech. If you were asking me about the next 5 years, I would say this is probably right up there near number 1. But for now, for the next year, for the next 18 months, it probably sits about here. I think the whole idea around rewilding and regenerative farming to restore biodiversity is really on the up, and it's really a conversation that is starting to happen that really could explode. And people are maybe moving away from, the idea of just not a plant diet, but what they call a climatarian diet to help reduce carbon impact. And there is some stuff around biotech and stuff which I want to talk about in a sec. But there are sort of tech startups helping farmers to make most of their soil, to make the soil. One of the things that people are talking about is the soil being one of the things that we need to conserve the most from a planet point of view. And there are some sort of firms that are doing some really interesting areas around this about converting farm waste. So there's a company which you may have heard of called Better Origin in the UK, who are using artificial intelligence to convert farm waste into insect feed, and then those insects into animal feed. And I think they've got 10 sites across the UK. And I think that's all really interesting. And I think this opens opportunities for us in regenerative farming practices, but also this idea potentially about biotech as well, which I think has been going around for generations around gene genetics, etc. There is some element of biotech which is around culture meat, which I'm not talking about particularly here, which is interesting and could be disruptive to meat, but there's a huge gap between actually making culture meat and consumers accepting it, and I don't know how easy that will be for any company. But in terms of opportunities for us, I think it's more about regenerative farming practices, biotech solutions to help improve taste, and also some great stories to go along with that. And I think there's a really lovely example called a Knapp Castle Estate in West Sussex, who are pioneering in this area, and they're trying to establish a sort of a functioning ecosystem with a process-alleged approach to sort of ecological restoration that is suitable for either failing or abandoned farmland. And they're creating sort of range of meat, free roaming but pasture-fed, sort of organic, old English long-haul cattle, Tamworth pigs and deer, etc. And then they promote it, they promote the health benefits, they promote the biodiversity, and they promote the fact that it's pasture-fed, and the fact that it's potentially carbon sequestering. Try that word again in a minute. It captures carbon in a great way, and also the animal welfare benefits. So they're using the whole sort of climate biodiversity piece to actually sell their brand onto consumers, and I think that's really an interesting project. Coming in at number 7 is get thrifty. So we know, and I've already talked about the fact that we have got a significant recession on the way, and getting thrifty is now this sort of new thing that I think will grow. We're talking about the sort of end of the throwaway culture and more about upcycling and more about using products in different ways, and the idea of make, do and mend and sharing stuff amongst communities. And I suppose consumers are starting to rediscover their grocery stores or pantries if you're American, and or even or pantries if in cottage farms, etc. And they're talking about how they can reduce food waste at home, and even pickling and all those things have been coming back in lockdown. So what it means for us, I suppose, is there's probably going to be a new renewed interest in nose to tail eating, and nothing goes to waste. And maybe something around some of our more value cuts and how we can use those in different products, whether that is through things like slow cooking. I think that is a really interesting area, and whether or not we can then partner with chefs to promote some of these more unusual cuts. Coming at number 6 then is comfort eating. And I suppose alongside this whole idea of thrifty and pulling back, and the whole idea of comfort is it's needed a bit more, and it's sort of in 2 ways really, sort of that coming sort of carb comeback and linked to tough times, and what they call cottagecore, which is about traditional artisan cooking, and the whole idea of hygge. If you know anything about Denmark, hygge is a great thing, and they talk about fires and sitting around and being in the moment and traditional foods. And then of course that leads on to things like slow cookers and rich stews and casseroles and pulled pork, and again the use of these sort of sous vide type techniques to make pork really juicy and pulled apart, and then can be used later because it has great shelf life. And even people like Jenny Oliver talking about 7 ways for sausage and mashed pie. And then on the other end of that is sort of a little bit more indulgent bit. So restaurants turning it into sort of super gourmet sandwiches, etc., and pasta and pizza. And for us, I think that means there are opportunities for these more value cuts in different ways, whether that is slow cooking cuts or family friendly recipes, and even on this sort of bit more gourmet ingredients area as well. So we're into the top 5. And at number 5 is we've got the frozen revolution. Well, so frozen was out in the cold. Sorry for the pun. Frozen was out in the cold and has now come back in. Frozen has had a massive change, I think. It was going through a change anyway, but now lockdown has really accelerated that. As we have done bigger shops, and then we're trying to do a whole week or 2 weeks worth of shopping in one go. We then put more in our freezer and use our freezer more as storage. And what's that enabled is really got some new innovation into the category for people who, premium products, and also people who didn't used to shop in the frozen aisle are now shopping in the frozen aisle. And it's not just for ice cream, although there's been some brilliant innovation this year, or not this year, in the last few years on ice cream. Excuse me, on a brand called Halo Top, which launched I think it was 1/4 of the calories ice cream, which has done a fantastic job. But also I've seen some great examples in our area. So sort of Heck, who are a premium sausage brand, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and have done phenomenally well over the last few years, have now launched their product. I've seen their product in frozen as well as fresh. And I think that's quite interesting. And that also gives us an opportunity, if people are accepting frozen premium, to sell frozen freezer bulk packs, selling either direct to consumer or through other people, but bulk freezer packs become an option, and even then onto sausages and meals, and even affordable frozen food. I think a company that has taken great advantage of this, and I'm sure you probably know about the Black Farmer. So I understand that raw sausages and other minced meats will no longer be available to be exported raw to the EU after Brexit. But so what the Black Farmer is doing is he's creating a range of frozen sausages for export and frozen other products. And this, I think, gives us the chance of, now it's become more accepting to sell super lovely premium products frozen, which gives us the chance to go further than local if we're thinking about direct to consumer or partnering with other people. Coming in number 4 then is we've talked about recession, but we haven't talked about indulgence in recession really. I think there is something that will happen in this recession, certainly has happened in the last 9 months, is those who have jobs and are lucky enough to be completely employed in the same sort of way that they were before, will actually feel probably better off currently, not emotionally, but potentially financially, because they haven't been able to go on holiday, they haven't been able to go out, eat out, they possibly haven't bought a new car. So as a result, they've got a bit more money in their pocket. So there are people who will have some more money to spend. And actually, just so we're not aware, I think between 2008 and 2014, it was Waitrose and Sainsbury's biggest share growth, even though that the markets were tough. So I think there is unfortunately going to be more polarization. But even if we have less money, we will still want a little indulgence, the lipstick effect. We want something just to make ourselves feel a little bit better. So what we're talking about is how do we have products that can have little small luxury touches to dinner, whether that is burgers with something like bone marrow or pizza truffle, or adding a gourmet artisanal product. And it gives us, if we're certainly providing to caterers or any of those sort of areas, it gives us opportunities to sell little things that just elevate products as well in a different way, and talking to those businesses in those ways. So whether that is artisan charcuterie, or something just to elevate the products. Now we're getting into the top three, and I think the first one is this whole idea of hyperlocal, and I think someone's already mentioned this already. When we talk about the shop of the future work, which is separate to this, there are a couple of big mega macro trends which I think have been partially driving this, but partially may give it some legs for the future. One is about sustainable responsibility, and yes, that's a broad thing and can be applied across supply chains, but also there is this thing about locals being more local, therefore being more sustainable through shorter supply chains. And then secondly, this whole idea around community and grassroots, supporting your local community. Certainly during lockdown, what we have seen is consumers sort of recentering with their locality, going to their local farms, etc. And there's an example, I think this is a Cornish rare breed pig farm called Rithiwr, who have been reaching out to their local consumers and had significantly more sales during lockdown, which I think is quite interesting. I think the only other thing around this is the opportunity to direct consumer sell. So there is an opportunity potentially, and maybe we'll pick it up in the Q&A later as well, for direct to consumer sell. Certainly in a very local way, I think there's an opportunity, and we've seen that with farms with milk. My local farmer has a milk vending machine here, and is there an opportunity to do something around that area? Is there an opportunity to expand that, to do that collaboratively as well? So the next area, or my second to last area, so coming in at number 2 now, is alfresco cooking and dining. And we talked about, smoked and fired up already, right out at number 9. But number 2 for this year, I think, is alfresco and cooking and dining. So last year it was massive because we couldn't eat out in restaurants very often. We did a lot of eating in our garden, and hopefully and socially distanced eating in our garden, and barbecues and picnics and all that sort of stuff. And the world seemed to sell out of patio heaters and gazebos, and it all went. So we've now got a lot of this stuff sitting in our sheds ready for using for this year, especially if everything's not restricted. So I suspect this year will be another good year for barbecues, certainly early spring, May, June, until everybody's out there. I think this will be another good year for barbecues, and all the products that go with that, whether that's flavored meats or smoked meats, or even chops with a flavor base, or anything on that area, in that area, could be significantly big again this year. So it may not be in 2 years, but for this year, I think this could be pretty good. And whether that is for barbecue boxes for delivery, and again, even in picnic food, etc., really big. And the last thing, I think, and the number one thing, and again, I think this is probably this year, but I still think it's now potentially changed the dynamic of the way we eat in some ways, is home delivery. It's been massively accelerated by consumers. Everybody expects it delivered fast. We haven't been able to eat out on Friday nights, so we get a takeaway. And that's not just Friday night. We now get breakfast takeaway, lunch takeaway, snacks and coffees, potentially even in cities. And we're starting to see, I'm sure everybody's heard of Deliveroo, but they're starting to create, or they do create in towns. They go into a town, understand the locations, understand which restaurants are missing, and then create a dark kitchen. So not with a front restaurant area, dark kitchen. And then they provide, they get businesses from other areas actually sometimes to even come in and run that dark kitchen menu, and then run it from a dark kitchen. So for us, what does that mean? It means that we've got many more opportunities potentially for route to market. I already talked about the e-commerce side, which is already 7.6% of meat, fish and poultry sold online, and potentially a lot bigger. So we could go directly consumers here. We could go via a dark kitchen route like Deliveroo and work with those types of businesses. We could go and work with food boxes, you know, whether people like Gusto and all those sort of stuff have great, you know, great menus that have done really well this year, and work with those suppliers to get our products out there. So no longer is it necessarily just through retail, but all these other avenues means that we can get to consumers in a more direct route. We can, of course, still do direct to consumer as well. And I think, you know, there is a lovely example of this. I think this is in the Wye Valley, called iTown, where they've created an app where it mixes both the businesses and local people can connect, so they understand what's available from the provider, and then they can even purchase through the app as well, or through the business's website and the app. And that's a lovely idea. It's about collaboration, and where we can collaborate, I think, is better. I think sometimes the issue is if we're trying to do it individually, unless we've got a really great amount of spend and do it, and we can really market it well, then we could easily be lost in the sea, because getting cut through is difficult, but collaboration can be a way through with that. So to summarize the bit about future trends, you know, pork has got a natural fit with many of the food trends we predict over the next 18 months. You know, we've got lots of ways of sort of adding value to some of our cuts through slow cooking, comfort food, and those thrifty meal occasions. We can add beautiful gourmet touches through some of the great sausages and charcuterie and other products that we can make. We've got meat that is super versatile for barbecuing and fire cooking and picnic food. And if we can add, you know, there is even about the veg bit, we can do something by adding vegetable products to make it healthiness, to drive healthiness and nose to tail thoughts around food waste. And there are opportunities for us to explore sort of on the home delivery or direct to consumer route, which is, you know, talking about doing stuff with farm produce box deliveries, or fresh or frozen, doing collaborations with other local businesses to expand our offers, even look at what other, you know, what emerging databases are happening and work with those. And all this can be underpinned, I think, from a Welshness point of view, and I'll talk about Welshness a lot in a second, and our local credentials with farm to fork potential traceability and some of the emerging sort of, you know, what sustainability stuff that we've been talking about. So that concludes the section on future trends. The last area I want to talk about is value of Welshness. And value of Welshness has been a really big piece of work that I have been involved with for a number of years, where we started in 2017 with an online survey, and now have run numbers of pieces of work. And I'm going to share some of the latest work this year. And this year we've done 2 or 3 big things. We did a large range of focus groups just before the pandemic kicked off. And then we did some online work during the pandemic. So we got some views within the pandemic. And then after that, we did a major piece of quant or survey work to try and understand what people were telling us in groups was meant in statistics. And we asked really 5 questions. And the first question was, what does Welshness mean to English and Welsh shoppers? The second question was, how does Welshness work on brand messaging for shoppers? So how does it apply it to our My packaging? Do shoppers actually want to buy Welsh products? Do they want to buy more Welsh products? And finally, has COVID-19 made a difference to shopper attitudes? So I'm going to talk through all those 5 questions, and then hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions. So the first thing is, what does Welshness mean to English and Welsh shoppers? And for English shoppers, when we ask them in focus groups, Welshness, what they talk about is natural and fresh is at the heart of what Welshness is about. They talk about the landscape. They talk about fresh air, clean, no crowds, nice shops and cafes, Snowdonia, mountain peaks, the outdoors, life, chilled and relaxed, beaches, mountains, winding roads, villages and small towns. And they talk about wet rain, lots of rain. That's why it's so green. Unsurprisingly, lamb is the #1 association of Wales. But outside of that, they talk about, you know, this rural imagery. They talk about a quieter pace of life. They talk about traditional. They talk about artisanal, not necessarily mega commercial. And they also say it's associated with holiday happiness. And it's physically, and I think it's something like 8.5 million people from England every year come on holiday to Wales or come visit Wales every year. And as a result, they feel physically and emotionally close to Wales, a lot of English consumers, and they feel relatively local. And I think that's quite important for us, because it means if we're thinking about, selling our products in England, actually we've got a huge piece of sort of emotional value that's linked to our products around Wales, especially when it's products that are closer to the countryside or land. And finally, they thought that we were pretty proud and patriotic, which is not a bad thing. We asked the same question then. What does Welsh meat mean for English and Welsh shoppers? We asked this in the quantitative survey, the statistical survey. We asked 2,000 English shoppers and 400 Welsh shoppers. And for 6 out of 10 English shoppers, it means better quality and better tasting. But it also means outdoor grass-fed, it means fresher, it means more natural. And then, nearly half of English shoppers thinks it's more sustainable as well. So I think there is a lot of values here, a lot of things that we can talk about on our products that can actually then go through on our packaging to talk to shoppers about. And the second question, which sort of leads me on nicely, is, how does Welshness work on brand messaging for shoppers? And really, if you talk to shoppers in England, what they say is the thing that they recognise most is the dragon. It's the primary cue. And for most shoppers are familiar with the Welsh flag and regard the dragon as the symbol of Wales, but not everybody. And even in the southeast of England, that was a little bit ignorant. And for lots of people, it has to say Welsh, Welsh lamb, Welsh cheese, Welsh pork, or made in Wales for you to know. It'd have to be the official dragon, the real Welsh dragon, not some made-up dragon. It's got to be the one off the flag for them really to be able to understand it quickly and easily. And also, it has some form of standard to it. It suggests a standard. And the other way they talk about it is it should be a little nod. It's an additive comment, an endorsement, not necessarily the star of the show, not necessarily the top thing we talk about. It's the official dragon that implies approval, ratification, and qualification. And if we want to talk about Cymraeg or Welsh, then it adds authenticity when used in a supplementary role. It sort of amplifies the Welshness. It makes us feel more Welsh. But it needs to be understandable if it's going to be sold in English to English shoppers. So it can't be too unpronounceable. It needs to be something that they can feel that they can pronounce. And I've got some examples here of how products have used Welsh and what it sort of means in terms of their positioning and how consumers think that. So if you look at the product on the left, this big Welsh egg pack, then what it's shouting about is Welshness completely. It's all about Welshness, and it's the star of the show. It says this product is differentiated because it is Welsh, not necessarily because it's anything else. Not that that's a bad thing, but that's what it's saying. And then this one in the middle is much more layered approach. We've got a brand that's called Blasetyr, which English shoppers can probably pronounce. We've got a name that says grown in Wales with a lovely flag, and the Welsh flag is quite visible. And we called it Pembrokeshire Early, so Pembrokeshire obviously in Wales with a landscape behind it. And the language is authentic, understandable, and pronounceable. And then if we were trying to sell a really super premium product, then the Welshness becomes more subtle. It's a little nod underneath the lid of the top of the cork at the top. And of course the brand is Saint David or Dewy Sant. So again, no problem. And it's how you use Welshness on pack can really help you differentiate your brand in a way, but it adds value, and I'll talk about why it adds value in a minute. So the next question we wanted to understand was, do shoppers want to buy Welsh products? And we asked this question in 2017, and 8 out of 10 shoppers looking at like-for-like products. So we showed a milk carton, milk package like this with a flag in the corner, and then we showed one with a British flag just like this, and we showed one with no flag just like this. And we asked, given a choice, which of these three would you prefer to buy? And nearly 9 out of 10 said we did prefer to buy Welsh milk. 9 out of 10, this is shoppers in Wales. 9 out of 10 said we prefer to buy Welsh lamb, and then 8 out of 10 roughly for water, cheese, butter. And then even when you get to something like this little steak pie down in the corner here, where only the beef in this case was Welsh, then half of shoppers in Wales would prefer to buy the Welsh product. So there's this underlying feeling that given a choice, Welsh shoppers would definitely prefer to buy Welsh. We know that. And I suppose the question is, is there a premium for that? And in this survey, it said 44% of people would pay more. But actually, it's just, it is in commodity categories, it's super apparent. But when you get to brands, brands are different. You know, brands, if you're comparing, say, a Cadbury's Twirl bar versus a plain bar with just a Welsh flag on it, it's got a completely different set of values. The Cadbury Twirl has got a whole load of brand advertising that talks about joyness and happiness, and therefore it's got a different set of criteria. And you're not comparing necessarily like for like. So we wanted to understand, when we looked at brands, you know, does seeing Welshness on the packs such as these, and these are pretty well-known Welsh brands, make you any more likely to buy these products? And we showed a range of both mid-tier products and premium products. And in Wales, we asked the question, so does seeing Welshness on packs such as this make you any more likely to buy these products? And it's a net positive score, so it takes off all the super positives minus the negatives to give you a net positive score. And nearly 7 out of 10 shoppers said yes, actually, yes, it does. It does make you more likely to buy the product. And for mid-tier products, that was 7 out of 10. For premium products, slightly less, sort of 6 out of 10, but still pretty strong. And then we asked the same question in England, and a third of English shoppers said yes, it would make me more likely to buy the products. And what's quite interesting here is there were very few negatives, so that it wasn't, you know, there were no negatives really. It was just either ambivalent, so they didn't really make a difference, but for a third of shoppers, it did make us want to buy more likely to buy the product. So what it does really is, by putting Welshness on your packs wherever you sell, whether it's in Wales or within England, it just adds value to your proposition, and it certainly does no harm. And then we just wanted to ask those final 2 questions: is, do shoppers want more Welsh products? And has COVID-19 made a difference to your attitude? And the first thing was, you know, would you like your store to stock more Welsh products? And actually 72% of Welsh shoppers said yes, please. So 7 out of 10 said yes, they would prefer my local shop to stock more Welsh products. And then we asked the question, so, you know, what about the effect of COVID-19? And the question we asked was, we know that COVID-19 and the lockdown has changed lives. Which factors, if any of below, will become more important to you when choosing food or drink? And, you know, that was Welshness, localness, or Britishness. And in Wales, definitely local is more important. Welshness is significantly more important. And also so is Britishness. And in England, Welshness is more important, Britishness and local, but British and local slightly more. What I think is that whole interesting area around local, where Welsh products with provenance and provenance to them feel quite local to a lot of English shoppers. So to summarise the value of Welshness section then, for English shoppers, natural and fresh is at the heart of what Welshness is about. The dragon is used as the primary cue for Welsh shoppers. And the language does add authenticity and adds value. Specific locations can add value, but probably needs a Welsh reference too. Welsh meat means better quality, better tasting for 6 out of 10 shoppers. And 8 out of 10 Welsh shoppers would choose Welsh as a country of origin in key categories. And 68% of Welsh shoppers and a third of English shoppers, based on a net positive score, seeing Welshness on a brand are more likely to buy the product. And 7 out of 10 Welsh shoppers would like retailers to stock more Welsh products. And since COVID-19, Welsh shoppers think that localness, Welshness and Britishness are more important. And I just want to finish with 5 things to think about for long and for the short term. From a product point of view, we talked about the impact of the forthcoming recession. So, you know, what do we want to think about? We want to think about those high value cuts, obviously, and bacon and all those things in lockdown, but also how can we add value to our cheaper cuts? You know, what does slow cooking look like? How do we get into that flavoured market for flavoured market? And how can we also add with a little bit of indulgence with those sort of premium bits if we're supplying restaurants or that sort of area? Then we've got the whole thing this year. I think, again, barbecue should be big. You know, we've got all this kit in our gardens, certainly until we're allowed to eat out a lot. We see that being quite a big area. The whole piece around direct to customers, whether that is not straight direct or whether that is via Deliveroo or one of those types, or food boxes, or direct to consumer, or collaborating, all those things are new routes to market for business and potentially can be moved forward. we have, a lot of positive things about Welshness. Consumers and shoppers in Wales love obviously buying Welsh food, but consumers in England value a lot of stuff that a lot of things around Welshness, and there's some emotional things that they think about Wales when they think about the products. We can apply that to our products and sell our stories, and the more transparent, the more real those stories are, the better. And the last thing, and I know this was like number 8 on my list, the last thing is in the long term, I think regenerative farming is an area of interest. This whole thing about climatarian type diet and is building, and the climate change is one of the big 3 things I think that are happening in the world that people are talking about a lot. And yes, we're going to be hard up and we'll want cheap food, or people will want cheap food, but this whole area will also be needed. The question is whether they'll pay for it or not. And I think that really summarises my presentation this morning. I'd be delighted to take any questions. Diolch, everybody, and thank you. I will take any questions that anybody might have, and I'll stop sharing them.
Lovely, thank you very much, Sophie. That was brilliant. Some real food for thought there. You covered a lot in a relatively short amount of time, and I think it was really useful the way you identified and described the trends, but gave us ideas of how we can really tap into to them, and how we, as businesses, we can adapt our businesses to get the most of those opportunities. So yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. Just before we move on to the Q&A, and before we move on to Kirsty from HCC, I just wanted to mention a few things that Menter Moch Cymru can offer you. Sorry to those that have already heard this at the end of mix session, but I know that there's quite a few new people that have joined us. So just a reminder that as a project, we're here to support and develop you and your businesses. So there's a range of support programs and advice and information that's available to you. Firstly, something that's clearly came out from Sophie's presentation was, consumers appreciate the story, or they want to know about your product and what makes you different, and what adds value to your product, whether that's a local message, Welsh message, and all the other things that Sophie mentioned. So to help you promote and market your products, we can certainly help you there, and there's some funding and grants available through the Menter Moch Cymru project, so please get in touch with us. We also can provide working with HCC, so I won't go on too much about this because Kirsty, I'm sure, will mention it, but working in partnership with HCC, we produce a range of free promotional materials, recipe booklets, cuts, guides, posters, bunting, stickers and things to help get your sort of the Welsh messaging across. So that's free and readily available. We've got a lot of information on the resource hub as well on our website, also including things looking at marketing and how to sell your product. And yeah, so that's a real snapshot of the support that we offer as a project. Please get in touch with us directly and we can give you some more information, or visit the website. So yeah, so we're going to move on to the Q&A. I can see a few have already come in. Please submit your questions by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. Firstly, Sophie, the first question that's come in, do you think the buying local boom is here to stay?
That's a really good question. Certainly, I think that people's eyes are being open to it and the sense of community. I think the climate change thing will also get people thinking about where their food comes from. I think there will still be an uptick for local, because a lot of convenience stores have improved their offer. So if you're talking about local convenience stores or farm shops have improved their offer, and as a result, people have seen that. And if you can get more of what you want in the store, then you're less likely to go elsewhere. So I think that there will be an uptick, long-term uptick. It won't be as much as it is now. I suspect if you suddenly looked at year on year, it'll look down next year, but it will still be versus 2 years ago up, is my view.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophie. We've got another one come in. For retail growth, you said that the discounters have not grown as much as the others. Do you think this is because they don't have a home delivery or click and collect offering, rather than, as you said, cleanliness of the store?
Yeah, I think cleanliness of the store is a little bit harsh because I think a lot of them are fantastic. I think that the click and collect, the online piece has been an issue. I know that Lidl are rolling out a click and collect version of their store now. And because we know that, you know, total groceries move 13% online, but the biggest thing I think has changed over the last year is the fact that people are doing bigger shops and going to these big shops less often. So they want to make sure they can get everything. So I think there's been a worry about how many people they're going to have around them if they go to a discounter, and the fact that they can get from a big store has probably moved the dial. To be honest, Aldi's done a lot worse than Lidl, and so that's a little bit of a surprise. And that's partly, I think, due to car parks, something to do with the car park sizes. I think Lidl had more space around car parks and stuff as well. But going forward, when we hit recession, I think they'll have a comeback. My view is they'll have a comeback, a significant comeback, because people will be really worried about money, and there'll be a large portion of society who will want that, which is why we're seeing the other retailers absolutely focusing on rationalisation and improving their pricing positioning and telling people that we're going to be, we're matching the discounters.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophie. Another question that's come in. Is local enough to be a premium product and warrant the premium price, or do we need to add more to our story?
Well, I think, you know, product differentiation, that's a really good question. I think product differentiation is always layered, isn't it? So being local helps, being Welsh helps. If you're the same price and Welsh versus another country, I suspect people will choose Welsh. If you are a different price, and in every category that price elasticity, or how much people will pay a bit more for, varies significantly. So in the gin market, there's probably quite a lot of price elasticity. You know, people pay a bit more for premium, you know, gins, and, you know, it's a quid or so here. When you get to meat, it's, you know, it's more intense, I suspect, my view. However, if you've got lots of layers, like you're appealing to a certain sector, so you're appealing to the, you know, the more premium upmarket people, they'll have a bit more price elasticity, and you're telling them about your fantastic, the way that you produce your pigs and what they feed on, and your everything else that you tick boxes, then you've got more than just a straight product. You've got lots of other tick boxes. In general, most people won't pay a lot more for sustainability. That's the stuff so far that we know. Something like 60% of people expect manufacturers or government, you know, to drive sustainability and just to be part of the brand offering. But actually, if you can add a lot of layers, then in your small, then I think you will have there is a certain target of customer that you can go after.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophie. We'll try and fit a few more in if we possibly can. Can small producers really compete in the frozen market?
I think that's a really good question, because frozen, you know, classically frozen, if you're talking about retail, the aisles are, the mods are smaller, the amount of space for frozen is smaller, so you're competing against, you know, they'll often have one or two brands and that's about it. I think locally, yes, and I think that maybe locally in the whole idea of direct to consumer, I think it's quite interesting, because, you know, how many people buy great butcher meat and put it in their freezer? You know, quite a lot of people do that. I regularly I try to buy my meat once a week, and most of it goes in the freezer, so it doesn't go out on the date. So it's just getting people over that hurdle of that, understanding that frozen can be fantastic. And I think there is a perception that some of that is changing now.
Brilliant, fab. I'll see if we can try and fit one more in. This is quite a broad one, to be fair. How can I get my story across to the right people?
Okay, so what you I suppose, firstly, you need to understand who you want to get it across to. So who is your target market? You know, if you're a premium producer, then you're probably going after people with lots of money and, you know, and have social, more eco-active. So understanding who your customer is, who potential customer is important. And then you need to think about how you can, social media is your first start. If you have very little money as a small business, then social media is probably your first start, and through building a community online slowly. And you can advertise on Facebook and those sort of things to your exact local geo-targeted consumer, you know, so you can target areas specifically to the right customer. So you can do it, and I'm sure Menter Moch can point you in the right direction to people who can help you do that.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophie. Really great points there. And yes, I'd like to add to that. So we would love to get involved with you and to help you. So please get in touch with us. Something that's really relevant today is that we're running a number of one-to-one sessions with experts during the course of the day as part of the conference, and we actually have a marketing specialist providing one-to-one services. I know she's pretty booked up, but if you get in touch with us, we'll try and fit you in so you can have a chat with Caroline Hannah and discuss your branding and marketing. We've also got information and resources on the Resource Hub, and we've got a webinar with Caroline Hannah on developing a marketing strategy. Again, we've got funding available to you as well to develop professional looking branded materials, so whether that's your packaging or assets to use online, it can be anything, and also includes the production and print of it as well, so that's really useful. If you don't have a brand yet in place, then Colquhoun can provide support and funding for that, and we've actually got a Colquhoun representative joining us at the end of the next session, so I'd encourage you to stick around for that, and also take advantage of the work that we're doing in partnership with yw'r Cymru, which Kirsty I'm sure will touch upon in her session in just a few minutes. So there's a load of support and that we can offer for you, so please get in touch.
There's been another question here. It says, how's the shifts or trends in sales from factory farm systems compared to small scale family farms with regenerative methods? I think we've got a bit of a sort of two-ended scale here. I think there is the absolute need and there is the constant drive for trying to provide cheap food, and there will be. So those big farms and factory systems are obviously going to be major. How they evolve to become less impact on climate is the interesting area around that, and that's what the cultured meat area is targeting. That's what they're targeting in America specifically. You know, those big factory farms and the amount of emissions they give out. So I see there is going to be a load of work around that area. Does that mean that there is no place for beautiful locally produced stuff? Yeah, I still think there is completely.
Brilliant, a nice one to finish on there, Sophie. Thank you very much. We're gonna have Kirsty from HEC join us just to give us a really brief sort of introduction and update on the work that they've been doing recently to promote awareness of pork produced in Wales. So I'd like to welcome Kirsty to the session.
I think this is working.
Hi, Kirsty.
Hello. Excuse my assistant. So I've got a few slides. Hopefully this will show it up now. Can you see that now?
Nothing's coming through just yet.
Oh, I need to do the share screen.
There we go. Something's happening. There we are.
There we go.
Brilliant.
So I'm Kirsty Jones and I'm the Market Development Officer for yw'r Cymru, and I look after the marketing campaigns for pork blasus. So for those of you that don't know, I know Mel's touched on it briefly already, pork blasus is an initiative by yw'r Cymru, and it offers producers and retailers a platform to promote pork reared in Wales. So we run marketing campaigns annually and offer producers their own webpage on our site and supply bespoke point of sale materials throughout the year, all of which is absolutely free to sign up and to collect. There's no problems with that. So what I'm just going to talk about today is every January we have, with the support of Menter Moch Cymru, we dedicate a special week to celebrating our pork producers and championing the unique product that they create. So this year, coronavirus obviously changed the way we approach Pork from Wales Week, with most of the activities taking place online, but we did manage to undertake a range of activities, and this included a consumer competition across our social channels to win a pork blasus hamper. We worked with chef Simon Wright and 7 other foodie influencers to develop new pork recipes with flavours from all over the globe. And we targeted consumers with traditional and organic PR as well as paid for media coverage, and supported all of our producers and retailers with a bespoke POS pack, which included a recipe booklet with all the new recipes in, a toolkit of how to get involved, on-pack stickers, bunting and social media graphics to get involved themselves online as well. And all of this was underpinned with a brand new microsite hosting further information about our pork blasus producers and retailers, as well as all of our new recipes and recipe videos. So this all took place last week, and some of the key stats that we've seen so far have been that our new microsite received over 5,000 different users, and with that users with over 6,000 views, and our new e-bulletin gained over 700 new subscribers as well. And the new 8 recipes that were launched throughout the week were turned into a recipe booklet, which has obviously been sent out to our producers, but it's also been downloaded 455 times so far. And all of our 3 social media platforms, from all of those, we gained over 1,000 new followers. So we've had really good interaction and engagement, especially. We thought it'd be quite difficult to do with coronavirus and not being able to get out there and do something in person. So, and all of this has gained both national and local press. So here you can see just some of the examples of the coverage that we've gained so far, with coverage and stats still being collected, as the week only ended on Friday. But you can see there's been plenty of coverage, and they've been featuring some of our pork producers as well. So yeah, Dr. Wald, thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you very much, Kirsty. Really useful to see, a bit more information about the campaign, the recent campaign, the work going on behind the scenes, and also the impact that it's having. So a real positive campaign, and yeah, again, we're delighted to be working in partnership with Hubby Cymru on that. So this the 3rd year, isn't it, Kirsty, that we've run that? So, and it's building every year. So if you haven't already done so, I'd really highly recommend that you go over to the Pork Blasters website and register on there, because not only do you have your own online platform that's free, but you also then will receive the regular seasonal point of sale packs to give out to your customers. So yeah, you've got nothing to lose at all with that. So yeah, so thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions for Kirsty whilst she's here? No, okay, so I guess that's the end of this session. Thank you once again to Sophie and to Kirsty for joining us.